Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Indigenous Peoples panel here at Stream Queens Con. I almost said Twitch Con. Stream Queens Con. Just a quick disclaimer before we get into anything. We do have one other participant who will be joining us, but they're going to be joining just a little bit late. Before we get into the bulk of the panel and introduce who we have with us, I just want to give a little greeting from my tribal language. Please forgive me, I'm still learning, but I would just like to say, Haku, Tianaki Mihia Tuki, Akwatu mi Ti Tuana Huki, Ti Tuana Ote Hanu, which is hello, acknowledgments to you and your family upon the back of the Turtle Island. So, before we once again get into the more bulk of things, I would like to just briefly go over what we're going to be doing today and who we have with us. This is, of course, the Indigenous Peoples panel. It is to bring together Indigenous people, not exclusively Native Americans or First Nations people, like Indigenous spanning anywhere across the globe, because contrary to popular belief, Indigenous does not just refer to North America. Um, so we're talking about our issues, our culture, things like that. We are not the end all be all of representation for Indigenous people. This is just who said yes, who was available. There's definitely a multitude of people out there that would have different experiences, but we're here to talk about ours. So with me, I have this lovely guest. Would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you and what your Indigenous background is.
Sure. So aloha mai kako ovo o kamakani ihi mai kalani. He kanaka wiwi mai au he ava I mau mau. Greetings everyone. My name is Kamakani. Friends also call me Dawn. My pronouns are they them. I am a Kanaka Maoli or Native Hawaiian on my native homeland of Hawaii. Like my ancestors, I am unapologetically queer. And in addition to being gender fluid and pansexual, I identify as Mahu, which is sort of the Native Hawaiian form of two spirit, if you will. It means in between, someone who possesses both male and female spirits. I am a writer, content creator at twitch.tv/Don Kamakani with two eyes. I'm a proud member of the Four Direction stream team. A little bit about the content that I have been working on, because I had a difficult time sort of finding spaces to navigate these critical conversations. My channel is focused on things like abolition, radical activism, and collective healing and liberation. I'll be starting a live stream podcast soon, which I'm really, really excited about. And I'm just really, really grateful for the opportunity to be here and to be in conversation with y'all. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
And then, as I said, we will have one other person joining us, but there was a little bit of an uh-oh, so they will be here soon. But even though you just saw me moments ago, I guess I'll introduce myself again, because as you can see, I'm an icon and I pulled a costume change. My name is The Blade. I call myself the Drag Demon. I am a drag visual artist here on Twitch. And if you couldn't tell by the name of this panel, I am in fact Indigenous. I am a Chumash Native American. So if you've been to places like Pismo Beach, Malibu, San Luis, a lot of those places are my tribal grounds, stuff like that. Don't believe that a reservation is the only place that belong to the people, because this whole damn continent belonged to the people at one point. So yeah, that's me. That's who I am. I am also of two spirit. I identify as two spirit. That was the inspiration for this look. In fact, it's trying to give you uh, androgyny deity. So I think we can go ahead and move into my first topic that I wanted to introduce, which is something about our culture that we wish people knew of or understood better, because as Indigenous people, we don't get represented a lot. And then when we do, it is often mishandled. So, what is something that you wish people knew of or understood better?
So for me, I think Hawaii specifically, a lot of people think Hawaii has like a quote unquote paradise per se, but little do people realize that sort of these systems of like tourism and gentrification, um, militarism and imperialism, all of these different kind of systems sort of create this idea of what appropriated views of my culture, if sort of speak. So um like I just want to like first of all like to kind of debunk some misconceptions about my culture. We don't live in grass huts. We don't just wear hula skirts. Where our culture is so much about like community and protecting our lands and waters. Native Hawaiians are genealogically linked to our Aina, which is like our lands and waters. Our cosmos and our creator stories tell us that we were born from the taro, like the plant of the taro. Um, and so we view our lands and waters as both our ancestors, our teachers, and we are deeply connected to it. So when you see things um, like, you know, people saying like, oh, we live in like grass shacks and huts and like wearing hula skirts and all of those kinds of things, like those are just stereotypical sort of things that are simply like honestly not true. Like, yes, we do have practices of hula, but it's so much more than just a dance. I guess it's about movement. It's about navigating the sacredness of your body. Um, I think like to have these sort of surface level stereotypes is just what we see a lot, and I want people to, I guess, kind of understand that these things are sort of like stereotypes. And I think that with my culture, I would like people to know that um, you know these things have been impacted by things like tourism and gentrification and sometimes even like the displacement of native people. So like these creates these ideas of what our cultures look like. um, and I think it's important that we kind of debunk those things, and know that there's like indigenous peoples have such deep and brilliant like cultures, stories, knowledge, and all of those kind of things.
Yeah, I have a somewhat similar answer. I kind of wish that people, I feel like indigenous people are very spiritual and like
Hmm.
connected with the earth, and
Hmm.
oftentimes I think it's viewed as kind of like silly and like just not the amount of things that I've heard. Like I've like, well, I'll speak about like how like, okay, I guess a good example is I've had a lot of experiences in my life where people will, because I'm very into the paranormal and I have a lot of friends who are into the paranormal, and the topic of SKINWALKERs will be brought up, which is like in at least in my upbringing, is a very hello. Um, let me just finish my little statement really quick, and then we'll introduce you. People will like bring that topic up, but for me that's always been like a taboo, like we don't talk about that thing. But when I tell people like, excuse me, like I'd rather you not talk about this thing because it's viewed as like a bad omen for me, and it's like bringing it on to myself or something, they kind of just look at me as like I'm being silly, or just a lot of things like that, where I just don't understand why people can't respect the culture and take it like seriously. I don't understand why it has to be like we're like a laughing stock, if that makes sense. Um, Hello, thank you for joining us. Would you like to give a little introduction, like your name, who you are, what you do? Yes.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Saitami. I'm also known as Thunderboy Sai. I'm a drag king thing in the um, so-called DMV area, DC, Maryland, Virginia. It's Piscataway territory. I am a two-spirit. I am a descendant from Ecuadorian and Panamanian Afro-Indigenous folks,
Oh,
ancestors. Inca Purua on my Ecuadorian side, and we are we haven't been able to trace back our Panamanian side. And what else was I gonna say? I'm in a theater right now where I'm working on the wardrobe crew, so I really appreciate the, you know, just me jumping on late.
Listen, we barely get to speak as it is, so I was like, any opportunity, I'll work around it.
For
And
sure.
then quickly, the question that you walked in on that you can answer as well is what is something about your specific like indigenous culture that you wish people knew of, and if not knew of, understood better? Because you know, where there's oftentimes our culture's misinterpreted or it's just straight up never showcased whatsoever. So what would be your thing?
I think I would say probably the most important part is the kind of worldview that Indigenous folks share, which is really essentially at its core, it's you know, having a balanced relationship between all life forms, so all of our relatives, our human relatives, and animals and plants, and kind of having this, yeah, this attunement and this connection to not just what's in our control, but everything that that it has life. And I think like that understanding, I guess, or like that let's call it a philosophy, um I think, at least personally, has helped me navigate this world in a less stressful way, and in a way that has given me really, you know, beautiful relationships and experiences in life where I can appreciate my day more. And that's just kind of, you know, really narrowing it, or like bringing it, reducing it to this like more like practical kind of standpoint. But I mean, if that is something that helps someone understand that Indigenous folks just, you know, we really are at our core, our belief systems really focus on harmony and the there's a specific word, and reciprocal
Mm.
relationships, which is hard, but we, our ancestors did it really well. They figured out, ooh, what's not balancing is my phone on the headphones, but I got it. But yeah, no, our so yeah, and I think like another part is probably that a lot of us, you know, Indigenous youth are out here trying our best to connect to those ways, and it's really difficult when, you know, the
Mhm.
world is so detached from those kinds of understandings that are, those are legitimate understandings from our people. So, you know, that's I think like what I kind of wish folks would understand more, and I try to like, you know, I guess I bring that, I whenever I've performed a few times where I've noticed that there's something happening in the world and we need a little prayer, and I try to preface it with, you know, talking about how this is coming from my culture, and this isn't, you know, trying to make sure folks are on the wavelength that I am, in the same, in the sense of like, this isn't like a Christian form of prayer or any other non, you know, just this is what my ancestors did, and um, how I believe as a person living in this day and age that we can heal, if we do this together. So it it it's been pretty well received when I give it that kind of like disclosure. But I only kind of just started performing live anyway, so so far it's been okay. But you know, everything about us tends to be 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, or actually, or 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, kind of deal with, in terms of like getting folks to understand us a little bit more and getting to know us a little bit more in our culture and our journeys.
Yeah, I think that actually all of our answers together really bring me to what I wanted to get into next, which is how Indigenous people are portrayed in the media, because honestly, we kind of aren't. And then when we are, it's more often than not, frankly, a shit show, because a lot of the references that people pull to when you hear Indigenous and media is just like the immediate examples are already like terrible. Because like the number one is Pocahontas. And I already harped on that one last year. I don't need to get into it again, but I just wanted to ask each of you, and we'll go ahead and throw it to Dawn first, which is, how do you feel about Indigenous people in the media? And that can refer to like your specific Indigenous background, Indigenous people as a whole, just overall your thoughts on how the media's portrayal.
Yeah, so I think more broadly speaking, I think a lot of times within the media, well, first of all, like Native people are grouped together as one group, I find sometimes, which is, um, but like you said earlier, Blade, Indigenous is a global term. There are Indigenous peoples throughout the world. Um, and like just within like Turtle Island, within the Pacific, and all over the world, there are many, many indigenous cultures that have various languages, practices, spiritualities, knowledges, etc. So I think um, when we when we think about the portrayal of indigenous peoples more broadly in the media, I think um, it's hard because it's like it feels like we're just grouped as one when there are just so much of vastness of indigenous peoples throughout the world. Um, I think like in the news and media in particular, like Native Hawaiians for specifically, I feel like um, when we're fighting for the protection of our lands, a lot of the times we're like viewed as like protesters. But like what I think is a real more critical perspective is we're really protectors. We're protecting our lands and our waters. Um, like for example, with the issue that's been going on with Mauna Kea and like the desecration by a 30-meter telescope, like we were like called protesters, but we were really there to stand in protection of our own native sacred lands. So I think like the ways in which we're framed um, is in itself an issue, but also I think when I look at things like the news and all of those kind of things, I think we're off, like at least for Native Hawaiians, a lot of the times we're highlighted as being quote unquote criminals. Like when we're protecting our own lands, preventing desecration, and fighting against these um, broader systemic issues of colonialism and displacement, when we are the ones who literally populate the largest like houselessness community on our own native homeland, we're viewed as these kind of like as criminals when we are the ones fighting in protection of our own sovereignty and access to our own lands. Um, and that also comes with this stereotype of being viewed, like a lot of times we're like called the loud, angry Hawaiians, like we're always loud and angry. And I'm just like, we're just trying to protect the sacredness that is our culture, our bodies, our lands, our communities. Um, and I mean, the settler government doesn't listen. So it's like when when you have these like framings of what of ourselves in the media, like if we are, it's often derogatory and makes it seem like we are the quote unquote like bad people kind of thing. Um, but of course, there's so much indigenous joy and vast indigenous cultures that are being celebrated that I think, media is also starting to do, but obviously there's a lot of work to be done also.
Yes, and then I'll pass the question on over. What would you have to say on that?
Yeah, totally. I can see that as well. for sure. There's just, I think, an immense gap of exposure to of non-indigenous folks to indigenous folks. Like, there's just a lot of folks who really are like, who have met me, who have met other people, or they'll tell me that I'm either the first or the second indigenous person they've ever met. And a lot of times I've also felt that way myself. Like, I'm the only indigenous person I know in this space, right? Um, and yeah, so I think like, um, more representation, just like, obviously, when I if I for clarity, representation meaning like proper representation, actual, like, by native folks, for native folks, with native folks, real native folks. um yeah, I think just like we need, I think media folks just, everyone just, we're more of an afterthought, if even, and so it's like, in a lot of ways, to a lot of people, we don't exist. And in even in times like these, where folks are jumping on these like diversity like trains, and like inclusion, DEI, diversity, inclusion, and equity and inclusion, and now we had like organizations and companies have to, find folks who are diverse. Even then, it's still like at the bottom of the list, if indigenous people, these are making the list. So I'm definitely noticing that. I work in theater as well, so I see that in theater a ton. um, and yeah, I guess like that's kind of my add-on. I do appreciate, though I will say, I do appreciate, I don't know too much about TV shows, and films, but I know that there's this really awesome show out, that is doing more good than not, to my knowledge, Reservation Dogs. And so there are shows like that that are like coming out, and and they're starting to like make some waves, and in more impactful ways, because they're by native folks, and they're putting in Easter eggs here, in the shows, where they're promoting indigenous made products and stuff like that. And you know our community, at the end of the day, isn't perfect either. Just because we're all indigenous folks doesn't mean there aren't going to be a lot of folks, in there, who aren't causing some kind of harm. So I know like that there are some indigenous folks who, I've talked to, who, aren't super happy with some of a lot of things from, the show Reservation Dogs, for example. So it's kind of give or take, and that's just kind of where we're at. And it's something. I think it's definitely come somewhere. We've had some progress. Mhm.
Yeah, because something that I have noticed when it comes to um, representation is, or like in the just in the media or out and about, the conversation around Indigenous people is always in the past. It's never like talking about us in the now. Like I remember I went to Knott's Berry Farm, which is a theme park in California, for my birthday this year, and there was this little like area that had like a museum situation. It was like cowboys and the other word that we're not going to use for native people. Um, and they were talking about my particular like tribe, and it was just a weird experience to me the whole time, because I never said anything to the man who's giving the tour, because I just thought it was kind of funny to like pretend that I was like oblivious, right? And it was so interesting to me hearing about my own people spoken to me as if we don't exist anymore. like it kept speaking to me in ways that like I wasn't standing right there in front of him. I mean, he didn't know, but my point is like we're still real, we're still here, but he was like they used to do this and they used to do that. I'm like I'm still doing it right now. Like um but I guess on a more positive note, there was something I wanted to share because you brought up reservation dogs. I think the debate around this movie is a little bit like mixed feelings. I know Prey came out this year and I avoided it like the plague. Like I was like really scared to watch it because I was like, I don't want to see indigenous culture butchered once again. But I ended up being really pleasantly surprised. There was a lot of the language used. I think the whole cast was real indigenous people. I mean, it wasn't perfect by any means, but it was like the first time I had watched something like that where they clearly did like a lot of homework. Like there was a lot of moments where I don't think if you were familiar with indigenous culture, you wouldn't even have realized it was like in there. So I was like, that's a really, I think a really good foot in the right direction. Also, the brother in that movie, Dakota Beavers, if you ever want to call me, I am single, ready to mingle. Um, but transitioning into our next topic of conversation, I'm curious to hear from both of you what issues that we face as a community or in your separate, um, backgrounds. What issues do you wish had kind of more awareness? Because, there's a lot of things that we face as a people that are just like not talked about. Like, for example, in the United States, and I believe Canada as well, there's a huge, huge issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and children, and it just does not get talked about. I mean, like hundreds of thousands of our people go missing like every year and they never get found. The police never look into it. Like it's just they're just gone and nobody cares. And then another one is like you always grow up with people thinking that you're rich because of like casinos. But on the flip side of that, there's people who live in the Navajo Nation who don't have running water, but people think we're out here like living the life and people don't have a basic necessity. So, I just really wish that people would drop that facade and think that we live like perfect sheltered lives when it's like there's people who are going missing, people who are murdered, people who are like living well below the poverty line, like no running water. Um, so whoever wants to pick up the question first, just what is like an issue that you really wish had more, it doesn't have to be media awareness, just more awareness overall.
I can go then real quick. The first thing, and this actually ties into things like representation and everything. First of all, I think, um, and I tweeted about this last night, but like in representation and in organizing spaces, I think it's important that we recognize that within Indigenous peoples, um, there there are Afro-Indigenous people, there are Black Native folks, there are Latine Native folks, and like it's important that that kind of like representation and awareness needs to increase because like there are things like when and this is a broader issue that I think we face a lot of the times is we feel like we're framed as like because of things like settler colonialism, white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, all of these different sort of forms of oppression, like we're pitted against other marginalized people sometimes. And it's important to recognize that um, like all of these sort of these issues, and I'm an abolitionist, so I'm probably going to sound really radical to a lot of people, but it's honestly the very like existence of a settler empire, the existence of the white supremacist capitalist empire. So like I'm just going to like say it, the United States illegally occupies my native homeland. And so when when I think about all of these different forms of issues that indigenous peoples face, like when our sovereignty is constantly on the wane, it's I think more broadly about the ways in which the existence of a settler empire is built upon and entrenches these forms of oppression like white supremacy, capitalism, heteropatriarchy, ableism, and these are through the forms of like militarism, policing, imperialism, all of these different sorts of forms of violence impacts our sovereignty. So, like with the Indian Child Welfare Act, that's been in conversation, where the Supreme Court argued whether or not Native children should be with their tribes, their families, their communities. That's a broader speak to Indigenous sovereignty and the wanes of the settler empire trying to determine sovereignty. Um, Another example is like the U.S. military like leaked their fuel tanks into a water aquifer on the island that I live on, and Native Hawaiians view like our waters as deeply sacred, and so when you have like you know like militarism being used to like desecrate that and them refusing to decommission it, um, it's again back to the issue of sovereignty and self-determination. And all of these things of issues about sovereignty, they're very much intersectional. So they are racial justice issues, they are gender justice issues, they are housing justice issues, they are reproductive justice issues, they're disability justice issues. And I think more broadly speaking, it's important that even within like things that Indigenous people face, we need to first of all like ensure that we're including and amplifying like Afro-Indigenous and Black Native folks, Latina Native folks, and just um, and because like they want us to feel like we're going to be pitted against marginalized communities. That's a tactic of white supremacy and settler colonialism. It's intentional. It's what they want for attempted Indigenous erasure. And so I think more broadly speaking, and that's super systemic, but I think that's just kind of the things that I want to bring awareness to, that honestly is a global thing that like people throughout the world, like Indigenous people face. And I just want to like amplify that.
And what about you, Sai? Is there anything that you wish had more of a, more attention?
Yeah, I think like one like I mean, okay, so Don explained everything so well, so I think like that is, I would like to like just make sure everybody knows that that is so important to know and understand, like everything that you just said. um it's it's hard, it's really hard because a lot of folks just, they just don't know. There's just so much lack of knowledge and information and about like everything. And besides, like, I guess like additionally, the diversity that is within us as pan-indigenous folks, as multicultural, or I guess like multi-ethnic indigenous folks. I'm still learning as well myself, in terms of terms. Um, and there's other ways that we are diverse. We are multicultural as well, of course. Indigenous, there's thousands of indigenous dialects across Turtle Island. And but I think like one of them, something that pops into my head a lot, even for within the indigenous community, is that you know is something that settler colonialism has tried to impose on us, is forgetting that we are that that there are non-binary folks, and that there's this concept beyond the gender and the sexuality that we know today, that we long held as sacred, more than just normal and common. It was sacred and uplifted, and it we were not in every culture, not every culture had the same types of um, societies and social structures. But a lot of times, folks who we talk about today as two spirits, um, or just indigenous folks who we could probably, as with the understanding that we have today, we could sort of associate that with queerness. So I'll just use that term for now, as like an umbrella term. But indigenous queerness has a lot to do with spirituality, and those are things that continue to be absolutely just unknown. They're not even forgotten; they were just never taught. And even a lot of indigenous folks are way, way, way like um, behind that. Behind and I don't know if behind isn't the best word, the word that I would want to use, but assimilation. Assimilation has seeped deeply into us, into our people. So even within the indigenous community, there is a lot of sexism and um, transphobia and and it's because of this assimilation, because assimilation teaches us to hurt ourselves from within. So that's something that I think, like, you know um isn't talked about enough, even within indigenous folks. A lot of times I feel like I have to kind of sacrifice um a part of myself when I'm trying to join Native community, and like I can't be both. I can't be Native and queer, um, which is why I appreciate a panel like this one today. So that's just something that pops into my head at this moment, just off the top of my head.
Yeah, and I just want to add on to how you brought up the fact that being like two spirit and other iterations of like a similar concept is like sacred, because I see a couple people in the chat commenting on how Open Milk brought up that some religions view queerness as like ungodly and stuff, but for us it's it's like almost like a sacred thing. Like I saw a while ago someone posted something that I loved, and it was this indigenous person and they were like standing, I forgot, like I don't remember exactly how the picture was like set up, but either way across their face it said like queerness is my queerness is traditional. And I loved that because I'm like, I hate that. I'm just gonna say it. White people think they own this goddamn country, and they do not. It belonged to other people before them. So why it's really angering to me that you're gonna come to me on my own land and tell me that I'm an abomination when we this was my land, and on my land that wasn't okay and even a praised thing. Like just like I was saying before we joined this call, like this look that I'm wearing, I wore it on purpose because I designed this look for the Stream Queens fashion show a couple months ago, and the fashion show had a theme around like divinity. And so I wanted to I wanted to bring like a two spirit kind of representation and show like the fluidity of a person and how that's a sacred thing to us. It's not some like, I'm not going to say that homophobia and other things don't exist in indigenous spaces, because it definitely does, but at the same time I would say you're probably going to be a lot more accepted because it really is a Christian white person thing to believe in those types of what's the word, like ignorance, I don't know. But moving on from that, because I could probably be there forever, I just wanted to read off a couple numbers for the audience, because I think we've touched upon a lot of things that people don't realize, and I just want to put into the audience perspective just how just how much damage has been done to Indigenous people around the world. In 2022, the census for people who identify as Indigenous in the US population is only 2.6%. And keep in mind that is people who identify as Indigenous. So a lot of those people probably aren't even Indigenous. So on our own land, we're only 2.6% of the population out of 574 recognized tribes, might I add, only recognized, because apparently you have to be validated. And as far as the world goes, there's only 5% of the entire world population is of Indigenous descent. So the reason I bring that up is because another thing that I think people are not aware of is just how much Indigenous culture is lost, how many Indigenous people are now dead at the hands of not only US colonization, but people worldwide getting assimilated and colonized. And it's awful. I find it so crazy that I'm going to be very careful on how I talk about this because it could enter uh-oh territory, but there was a very big genocide that happened in world history. And it was very, and people talk about that specific event in such like disgust. But when you, as an Indigenous person, bring up the fact that there was a genocide that happened on US soil, people are like, you're being overdramatic. And I'm like, no, like 90 something percent of the Indigenous population in North America died at that time. It's not some like, there goes the natives like yelling at people again. This is like a serious thing. So I just wanted to add my 2 cents onto all of that. I would like us to, I'm really glad that we're having a very open and raw conversation, but I think a lot of times when we're in spaces like this, we focus so hard on issues that we don't get the time to share like more positive aspects of our cultures, our individual cultures. So I want to take this time for us to share maybe like a story or like a piece of our culture that we cherish, that we love to like kind of share with everyone. We can go ahead and start with Dawn first, so we can, you know, everyone gets their space to speak.
Sure. So I think for context, it's what I think is so beautifully unique about like being Native Hawaiian is we're situated in Oceania, the vast Pacific, right? So in addition to being like genealogically linked to our native homeland, is the fact that we recognize that we have mana, which is like a spiritual power, a sacred power, if you will. Um, we recognize the sacredness of every being, both human and non-human. We are healers, protectors, practitioners. We have brilliant sciences that honestly have kind of been lost in terms of the kind of teachings that we've um, and like generations of things that may have been passed down. So we have like brilliant sciences, like the practices of building fish ponds in such an ethical way that um, allows us to be very community focused in contrast to capitalism and its individualistic sort of ways of viewing the world. We take care of our communities. We support people in our villages. We have lo'i patches, which are like taro patches of agriculture that we allow plants to grow on, and we use things already existent with the earth. We do ceremony before we participate in all of these different kinds of things. We we have ceremony to bring ourselves into these spaces, and before we start engaging in these cultural activities. Um, a thing that's really amazing that I think is just so brilliant is we have traditional wayfinding practices. So like we build canoes using a traditional method, all like we build completely by ourselves. We use these canoes to traverse the world, and we do it in a way. Um, we use constellations. So we use like the stars. We use like the sky and the moon. We don't use maps to like navigate ourselves, which I think is just absolutely brilliant. So for you to be able to use a canoe that you built and in a traditional way traverse the world without using maps, um, and using these constellations, these sciences, really is such a beautiful thing. And I think to put it in the context of the Pacific, um, we view that Oceania, the broader Pacific, it connects us all, and so it's just such a beautiful way of thought. And one one thing that I love to share with people that I personally experienced is in November of 2019, I went to Mauna Kea. So Mauna Kea is on the island of Hawaii, the Big Island, and that was around the time where there was continued um, like protection of the mountain against the 30-meter telescope, and it was really at that moment that I had never felt more like unapologetically Hawaiian, because I would see that there was ceremony and chants being performed 3 times a day, and actually getting to participate in it was a transformative experience. To see a whole university set up that provides like cultural, historical, and political education to all Hawaiians and those who are standing in solidarity. Like there were indigenous peoples from all over Turtle Island and all over the world who were coming to stand in solidarity in protection of our sacred mountain. And to just even experience that, um, I cried so much that day because it was honestly a huge awakening for me. I had never felt so connected to my culture, to my land. Like I'm not even joking. Like it's almost as if I could have heard and like felt the land calling me. Like awakening me almost, and like our spirits calling out to me and telling me to wake up. Um and it was really at that point that, despite never like growing up learning about my native culture or feeling connected to it in any way, um, it was at that moment that I realized that I wanted to take it upon myself to reconnect with my indigeneity. And I will always like forever be grateful for that experience, because I've never I've never felt more unapologetically myself. And from then on, I've just been so grateful to like to feel that way. Um, and so yeah, that's a lot about my culture, but it's a story that I hold really dear to my heart.
Don't feel sorry. We're here to share. We're here to educate the white people. Well, everyone, but Um, and then what about you, Sai? What do you have any like something about your culture that you like to share?
Yes, of course. First of all, thank you so much, Don, for sharing all of that. I personally feel so much richer just hearing that, rich in soul spiritually. So I'm really glad that you've had that experience, because I think and now you've shared it with us, and just um, in a certain way. We'll never fully experience what you experienced, but I'm really grateful that we can share that right now. I just want to have a moment for that, real quick. But I think, like, I grew up in several countries in Latin America, and I got to experience the way that some native cultures in Latin America uh, live, and how they are in their hometowns, and how they are in the more urban areas. And then I've also experienced seen, and I grew up sort of I grew up in touch with my ancestral lands in the central area of Ecuador, and but we would visit from the city. So we were living in the city, in the capitals, and then we would my family through my father's side have been really adamant, thankfully, that we maintain our culture, maintain a connection to our culture. Um, uh, while navigating this world. For whatever reason, my dad, their lineage, like his father, his grandfather, they all kind of have maintained that role of like, you know, we're gonna navigate the society, but we're not gonna forget who we are, and we're not gonna forget where we come from, and we're not gonna ever, you know, we're gonna come back to these lands right here. Um, and there it's called gacha in Ecuador. Uh, my people are called the Purua people. They were we are an alliance between the Incas and Purua folks out there, and so actually it was an alliance between the last Incan. It was for no, that came after. But basically, the Incan civilization, it was mainly in Peru, but there's been a lot of migration throughout history. A marriage alliance formed so that there could be land sharing and resource amplifying, and which is a great way to, you know, uh, to share resources as opposed to, and not to bring it down again, but like I want to emphasize that, you know, and maybe what I'm trying to emphasize is that we have long been compassionate people. We have long been community oriented. We have long been trusting and like aware that we are like what we say is what we mean. What we do with intention. What we do it because we're connected. And before we even do it, you know, ceremony is something that Pan Indigenous folks tend to have at the forefront, and it's something that's truly, I think, the most ground. It's I've seen it be the most grounding thing that we can have, especially in this kind of day and age. But my point that I'm trying to get back to is that my one of my great grandfathers, well, my one of my ancestors is actually the last Incan emperor, as he was known. An emperor is like, you know, a more modern colonial term. So his name was Atahualpa, and was he was killed by Francisco Pizarro after he had agreed to a deal and like a negotiation with him, and was stabbed in the back, but in the front. And so I've noticed that happen a lot over time, and I actually see that in microaggressions with my interactions with white folks as well, to this day. And I think like that's something that I want to share, because that's how like this like this energy, right, the energy behind colonialism, that sort of like that cruel, that like distressing individualistic probably is at its root. This energy of I will get my way despite who is in my even if I have to kill another person, even if I have to kill an entire society, you know. Whereas because we've always had this sense of community within ourselves and within our surroundings, you know, we continue to be the compassionate, understanding people who want the best for everyone, and continue to be taken advantage of because of that sort of kindness. And so I just wanted to like bring that up real quick. But like, yeah, I think like our sense of community is like incredible. Um, it's beyond this realm. Every time I'm in community with other Native folks, I can feel also just like I want to kind of try to, I guess like my senses just heighten, and um I don't know, it just I just start feeling more connected, I guess, and I guess I feel more like myself. And so spiritually speaking, I do feel like I am with um with that many more ancestors in the room, spiritually. um in terms of my culture specifically, I mean, uh as at least the one that I can speak for, that I'm aware of, us Purua folks, like we have we have three rules that we we have upheld forever. Don't lie, don't steal, don't and work hard. um Three rules, and I think like that's just kind of at the core of pan indigenous folks in general. We have such great sense of humor, and that comes from like this intelligence that I think like it's hard to it's uh, having had the opportunity to meet a lot of different kinds of folks from different backgrounds. um, I don't think that there have been more just there's this, maybe it's like a wisdom that comes from that, with that humor. It's because, you know, comedy, laughter, it comes with us, it kind of comes from a place of like, you know, you see a truth and you express that truth um in a way where you can just have a moment to relieve yourself. And I've heard this said before, by um, Native elders, that to not forget to laugh, you know, not forget to have some humor, because that is medicine as well. You know, we get caught up in this, like we need to have these kind of boundaries, for ourselves and for our community, and like, and this respect, and that respect definitely obviously needs to be upheld in the best ways possible. So sometimes it is important that we be serious, but in other times it's also so important to like absolutely not be serious and just like really just be funny. And so I think that's probably, I'll probably end it with that. Well, some of the funniest people I've met, you know, the greatest comedic medicine I've had has been with Indigenous community. Not to say that we're like funny, but like we just love life.
Well, unfortunately, it looks like that is all the time we have for discussion left. I'm gonna let each of you say your goodbyes, just any quick final thoughts, where we can find you, and yeah, I hope you guys had a great panel. We can go ahead and start with Dawn first.
Sure. So first, I just want to say mahalo nui for the opportunity to be here and be in conversation with all of you amazing people. I'm grateful to the folks who like branched out and encouraged me to network and everything. A huge shout out to the Four Directions team. It's a Twitch stream team comprised of all Native content creators working to bring awareness to Indigenous issues and giving back to our communities. We're currently doing a charity for the Indian Residential School Survivors Society. So like most of the members are participating in that. For me personally, you can find me on twitch.tv/Don Kamakani with two eyes, as well as just Don Kamakani on other social media platforms. I am not rated E for everyone, but I am radical and I'm here to vibe with like-minded people. And I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to be in conversation with you all. Thank you all so much.
All right. And then what about you? Where can we find you? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, thank you so much. This was really amazing. Loved being able to meet you, and I hope that folks who are tuning in, who have tuned in, have gotten a good amount of information. And please stay in touch with everyone here, not in the sense of like keep checking on what we have, what we're putting out. Because if you wanted a resource, we're making ourselves available. And I am mainly on Instagram at Thunderboy with an I dot Psy, and that's spelled TSAI. So Thunderboy dot Psy. And I am a interdisciplinary artist. So Instagram is my main place, but I'm also on TikTok and YouTube, and that's just a place where you can kind of enjoy the quote unquote content that I've created, the art that I've created that I have made with the intention to support folks' healing journeys. Um, and and decolonial journeys. So I think for now, and I have a link tree in the bio in my Instagram bio. So if I look at my messages everywhere. So if you don't have if someone doesn't have Instagram and has YouTube, and you can message me on YouTube. So I am here and available. And thank you, Blade.
And I am Blade. I do the Twitch thing. I'm just trying to wrap it up quickly as possible. You can find me there. I do stuff. The main thing I want to plug, though, is that I just released my first debut film. So if you love supporting Indigenous people and their creations, please go. I think there's a link in chat. Go support my film. I hope to make many more. And I just thank both of you for joining me in this conversation. A lot of it really touched my soul and my spirit. I almost cried a couple times just because I deal with a lot of imposter syndrome in the Indigenous community, unfortunately. I mean, I have been very well accepted, but I still, at times I just feel that way. So this is very validating. I thank you so much, and I think we're ready to say goodbye.